Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. It's funny how often even the most fundamental questions about, well, everything can lead us down some pretty mind-bending paths.
It's true, and that's exactly the territory we're venturing into today with the Anthropic Principle. Buckle up, folks, because things are going to get weird.
Oh, I can't wait. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, how about a quick explainer for those who might be new to this whole anthropic principle thing?
Right, so in a nutshell, the Anthropic Principle basically says that the universe has to be compatible with our existence as observers.
Because if it weren't, we wouldn't be here to talk about it, right? Exactly. It seems kind of obvious when you put it like that, but trust me, there are some seriously wild implications that stem from this seemingly simple idea. And to unpack them properly, we're turning to a true master of making the complex both clear and wildly entertaining. Scott Aronson and his PHYS 771 Lecture 17, Fun with the Anthropic Principle.
He really leans into the fun part, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
His work is like a masterclass in taking these heady philosophical and scientific concepts and injecting them with a dose of, well, almost mischievous playfulness.
Which is exactly what makes it so engaging. So to keep things in that spirit, shall we jump right into our first mind-bending thought experiment, God's coin toss?
Let's do it.
All right, so imagine a universe where right at the very beginning, there's this coin flip. Heads, and we get two rooms. One room's got a person with red hair, the other someone with green hair. Tails. Just one room, and you guessed it, a red-haired person inside. You wake up in this universe, first things first, check a mirror, and bam, you've got a glorious head of red hair. The question is, what are the odds that old God flipped heads with that coin?
Now, it seems intuitive, right? 50-50. Coin flip, two possibilities.
Exactly. But as with so many things related to the anthropic principle, our intuition might be leading us astray here.
It often does. This is where Bayesian reasoning comes in to shake things up a bit. Instead of just looking at the coin flip in isolation, we have to consider the evidence. And that evidence, my friend, is your red hair.
Okay, I'm following so far. But how does my red hair change the odds of a coin toss that happened, well, who knows when?
Because, think about it, there's actually a higher chance of you being a redhead if the coin landed on heads, two rooms, two redheads versus tails, one room, one redhead. So your very existence as a redhead in this scenario actually provides a clue.
So it's like by simply being a redhead in this scenario, I'm subtly shifting the scales of probability.
Precisely. And when you crunch the numbers using Bayesian reasoning, it turns out the probability of that coin landing on heads, given that you're rocking that red hair, is actually 1/3.
Whoa, okay, that's wild. I'm starting to see why the anthropic principle can be so slippery.
And we're just getting started. This whole idea ties into what's known as the self-sampling assumption, or SSA, the idea that you, as an observer, should consider yourself a random sample from all possible observers. And in this universe, there are simply more potential red-headed observers if that coin landed on heads.
All right, that's a lot to process. I'm already feeling the gears in my brain turning. So it's almost like just by existing as we are, we're already tipping those cosmic scales in some subtle way.
Exactly. And that leads us to a thought experiment that takes this concept to a bit of a, well, let's just say a more intense level.
Oh, even more intense than a universe decided by a coin flip. You have my attention.
Well, imagine this. We've got a room, the dice room, if you will. And in this room, there's a, shall we say, a rather eccentric individual who's kidnapped a bunch of people.
Okay, that took a turn.
Right. So he's got them all in this room, and he rolls a pair of dice. Now, if he rolls snake eyes double ones, well, let's just say nobody wins that round.
Yikes, that's not good.
Nope, not good at all.
Yeah.
But if he rolls anything other than those dreaded snake eyes, he lets everyone go free.
Oh, thank goodness. So it's all okay then, right?
Not quite. Because then he goes out and kidnaps even more people, brings them back to the room, and rolls those dice again.
Hold on, he just keeps doing this over and over again.
Oh yeah, escalating the whole thing every time until he eventually rolls those double ones, which, as you can imagine, poses a rather unsettling question for anyone unfortunate enough to find themselves in that room.
I can only imagine. So what are we talking about here? A 1 out of 36 chance of meeting a sticky end on any given roll.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? On the surface, yeah, it's just basic dice probability.
Right.
But what makes this thought experiment so effective and a bit terrifying is that it forces us to think about the bigger picture. See, it's not just about the odds of any single dice roll. It's about the increasing probability that someone is going to be in that room when those snake eyes finally show up.
Oh, I get it. It's like the longer this kidnapping spree goes on, the more likely it is that someone's number is up, regardless of the odds on any individual roll.
Precisely. It becomes this kind of morbid lottery. And what makes it even more interesting is how it connects to those real-world anxieties we all grapple with.
Okay, I'm seeing it. So it's like every year that goes by without a major global catastrophe, a pandemic, an asteroid impact, those sorts of things, it can feel like we've dodged a bullet. But the dice room suggests that the longer humanity exists, the more likely it becomes that we're eventually going to hit that metaphorical snake eyes.
Exactly. Which brings us to a particularly chilling concept, the Doomsday Argument.
I was just about to say, it feels like we're headed straight for a discussion about the end of the world.
Well, in a way, yes. But the Doomsday Argument isn't about any specific doomsday scenario. It's not about asteroids or climate change or anything like that. It's more of a statistical argument, suggesting that based on pure probability, we're more likely to find ourselves alive during a period with a relatively large number of human observers compared to, say, the very beginning of humanity or, well, the very end.
Okay, so try me on this one. How does that work exactly?
Imagine you're baking a cake. Right. You're not quite sure how long it'll take, but you check on it every few minutes. Now, statistically speaking, you're much more likely to catch it at some arbitrary point during the baking process than at the very beginning when you first put it in the oven, or at the very end when it's perfectly golden brown.
I think I see what you're getting at. So, in this analogy, humanity is the cake, and we just happen to be alive at some random point in its baking process.
Exactly. Although, admittedly, in this case, the cake is existence itself, which I'll grant you is a slightly less appetizing thought. But of course, this being such a mind-bending concept, there are counter-arguments to consider. Some people call it the chicken little objection.
Like, the sky is falling,
It
children.
doesn't. Precisely. Throughout history, there have always been folks predicting the end of the world. And yet here we are, still kicking.
So, how does the doomsday argument account for those past, well, let's call them failed predictions?
Well, the argument doesn't necessarily disagree with the idea that people have been predicting and surviving doomsday scenarios for centuries. It simply suggests that those past instances don't actually change the underlying statistical probability. Think of it like flipping a coin.
Yeah.
Just because you happen to get heads 10 times in a row doesn't mean that 11th flip is any more or less likely to be tails.
Okay, I get that. But if we're talking about probability and the vastness of existence, things get even more complex, don't they? Earlier, we touched on the self-sampling assumption, that whole idea that we should consider ourselves random samples from the set of all observers in the universe. But now we've got this other contender entering the ring, the self-indication assumption, or SIA.
Ah, yes, SIA. Another heavyweight in the world of anthropic reasoning. And you're right, it definitely throws another wrench into the works. While SSA suggests we're likely to be typical observers among the total set, SIA flips that on its head, proposing that a universe with more observers is actually more likely to contain you, the observer.
Hold on. So we've got SSA saying a shorter-lived humanity is statistically more probable, and then SIA comes along and says, nope, a longer-lived humanity is more likely. How can both of those be true at the same time?
That, my friend, gets right to the heart of the matter. It's a question that has stumped philosophers and scientists alike, and it highlights a key tension at the core of the Anthropic Principle. It can often lead to these seemingly contradictory conclusions depending on which assumptions you choose to prioritize.
So how are we supposed to figure out which assumption is, I don't know, more correct in a given situation?
That's where things get really tricky, because it's less about one being definitively correct and more about understanding the strengths and limitations of each assumption when applied to a specific problem or thought experiment.
So it's less like choosing between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver and more like trying to decide whether you need a hammer or a wrench when you haven't even quite figured out what you're building yet.
Now you're getting it. It's about using the right tool for the job, even if we're not always entirely sure what the job is. And to illustrate this point even further, I think it's time we brought in some presumptuous philosophers to help us along.
Oh, I love a good philosophical debate. Bring on the presumptuousness. Okay, I'm ready for some presumptuous philosophy. Set the stage for us. Who are these philosophers and what makes them so presumptuous?
Well, imagine this. We've got a group of physicists, and they've been hard at work, trying to nail down that elusive theory of everything. And after years of research, they've managed to narrow it down to two possibilities.
Two grand unified theories of the universe. That's got to be both exciting and incredibly frustrating at the same time. What are the differences between these two theories?
Right. It's like having the answer right there on the tip of your tongue, but not quite being able to spit it out. So, Theory 1 predicts a universe of a certain size, with a certain number of observers like ourselves out there somewhere. Theory 2, on the other hand, well, it gets a bit more ambitious. It predicts a universe that's, say, a billion times larger with a billion times more observers.
A billion times larger. Now that's what I call thinking big.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where our presumptuous philosophers strut onto the scene. They take one look at these two competing theories and boldly declare Theory 2 the winner.
Without any further experimentation or observation. Why? What's their reasoning there?
Their logic goes something like this. If Theory 2 is true with its vast universe teeming with observers, then, statistically speaking, there's a much higher chance that these particular philosophers, would exist in the first place to observe it. They're basically saying that the universe with more observers is somehow more likely to contain Gresham.
Well, them.
I see what they're getting at, but it feels a bit like a shortcut, doesn't it? Like, instead of doing the hard work of actually gathering evidence and testing predictions, they're just saying, well, I'm here, therefore, the universe that's more likely to produce me must be the right one. It's almost like trying to explain the shape of the moon using anthropic reasoning before anyone's even seen the moon. Exactly, and that's a brilliant way to put it. This whole scenario highlights a key limitation of relying too heavily on the anthropic principle, particularly the self-indication assumption. It can sometimes lead to these sorts of circular arguments where we're essentially using our own existence as the sole justification for a particular theory without the hard evidence to back it up.
So like we were saying earlier, it's all about choosing the right tool for the job. And the anthropic principle, while fascinating and thought-provoking, isn't always the most reliable tool in our philosophical toolbox.
Precisely. It's a valuable tool for thinking about our place in the universe and exploring the relationship between ourselves and the cosmos, but it's not a magic wand that can instantly solve all of science's greatest mysteries.
Speaking of mysteries, I think it's high time we brought in those biblical power couple, Adam and Eve, for one last head-scratcher of a thought experiment before we wrap things up for today.
Ah, yes. Adam and Eve. But instead of grappling with forbidden fruit and talking snakes, they're going head-to-head with a computational puzzle known as a 3SAT problem.
Okay, gotta admit, that's not the scenario I was expecting. So for those of us who might not be fluent in the language of computational complexity, what exactly is a 3SAT problem?
Well, imagine a Sudoku puzzle, but on steroids. It involves these logical formulas with variables and clauses, and the goal is to find a combination of inputs, true or false values for those variables that satisfy all the clauses simultaneously. It's the kind of problem that can make your head spin, even if you're a computer science whiz.
So not exactly a walk in the Garden of Eden then, but what does all this have to do with our ancestral protagonists?
Well, Adam and Eve, clever as they are, decide to use the possibility of their future descendants to try to crack this 3SAT problem.
Hold on, they're gonna solve a complex math problem by having kids. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's definitely an unorthodox approach. Okay, so here's the plan. They randomly pick a potential solution to the 3SAT problem. If by some cosmic coincidence they happen to get it right on the first try, well, no need for descendants. They can just relax, enjoy paradise, problem solved. But if their solution is wrong, that's when they kick off their lineage. They have a whole bunch of kids, and those kids inherit the unsolved 3SAT problem.
Okay, I think I see where this is going, and it's getting pretty wild. How does the self-sampling assumption factor into all of this?
Right. So remember, the SSA basically says that we should consider ourselves random samples from the set of all observers in the universe. And if we apply that to Adam and Eve, well, it means they're more likely to be just any random observers within the grand scheme of human existence, right?
Right, but wouldn't that make the odds of them being the very first humans with the potential for billions upon billions of descendants riding on their ability to solve this 3SAT problem almost infinitesimally small?
Exactly. So if we take the SSA seriously, and we're assuming Adam and Eve were indeed those first humans, wouldn't that almost guarantee that they stumbled onto the correct solution to that 3SAT problem on their first try? It's almost as if their success was baked into the very fabric of their existence, simply by virtue of us being here to think about it.
Now, that is a truly mind-blowing thought. It's almost like suggesting that if the self-sampling assumption holds true, and Adam and Eve were indeed the first humans, then their very existence implies a kind of pre-programmed solution to a complex computational problem. And that begs the question, does this thought experiment, with its blend of anthropic reasoning and computational puzzles, hint at the possibility that we might be living in a simulation?
It's a question that some find intriguing, others unsettling, and it's a perfect example of how the anthropic principle can lead us down these rabbit holes of thought, challenging our assumptions about reality, simulation, and the nature of existence itself. It often raises more questions than it answers.
That's certainly been true for our conversation today. We've journeyed from universes determined by the flip of a coin to rooms ruled by the roll of dice. We've pondered doomsday scenarios, wrestled with presumptuous philosophers, and even dared to imagine Adam and Eve as code-breaking pioneers in a potentially simulated Eden. We might not have all the answers, but I think that's part of the beauty of it all, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the spirit we always want to encourage here, embracing the unknown, grappling with big questions, and never losing that sense of curiosity and wonder.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, to our listeners out there, wherever you are in the universe, real or simulated, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those deep thoughts bubbling. If you encounter any mind bending paradoxes, philosophical quandaries, or just plain weird thought experiments, you know where to find us. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride through the Anthropic Principle. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.